At a small-town high school, an annual Veterans Day assembly was meant to honor the heroes who had served. However, tension rippled through the crowd when a self-proclaimed woke woman, an outspoken parent, stood to confront the decorated veteran guest speaker, accusing him of representing outdated values and systemic oppression. The audience gasped, but before the tension could boil over, a quiet student, known for keeping to himself, stood up. What he said and did next left the entire auditorium in stunned, emotional silence. The gymnasium was filled to capacity for Crest High's Veterans Day Assembly. A massive American flag draped the stage, surrounded by posters honoring local veterans. At the center of the stage stood Sergeant Daniel Dan Miller, a retired Marine. His uniform was impeccable, his silver-streaked hair and rows of medals marking him as a man of service and sacrifice. Alex Thompson, a quiet senior, sat mid-row, gripping his knees. For most students, the assembly was a welcome distraction from classes. But for Alex, it was deeply personal. His father, Captain Robert Thompson, had been a Marine who died in combat when Alex was only 10. Though he rarely spoke of it, the folded flag from his father's funeral still sat on the mantel at home, a silent reminder of his family's sacrifice. Principal Reynolds approached the podium, commanding the room's attention. Today, we honor those who have served our country, individuals who exemplify courage, duty, and sacrifice. Please join me in welcoming Sergeant Dan Miller. Polite applause filled the room as Sergeant Dan stepped forward. His calm voice carried through the gym as he shared lessons learned during his years of service: camaraderie, resilience, and the value of serving a cause greater than oneself. He spoke not of war's brutality, but of the bonds formed and the principles upheld. The audience sat in respectful silence, many students leaning forward to listen. But not everyone shared the mood. In the front row, Claire Whitman, a parent known for her outspoken opinions, sat with her arms crossed. Her sharp expression and fidgeting betrayed her growing frustration. Alex noticed her, sensing that something was about to happen. When Dan spoke of sacrifice, Claire abruptly stood. "Excuse me," she said loudly, her voice cutting through the quiet. "I'm sorry, but I can't sit here and listen to this. Glorifying violence and oppression has no place in a school." Gasps rippled through the audience. Dan paused, his expression calm. "Ma'am," he said evenly, "today is about honoring those who served, not debating politics." Claire's voice grew sharper. "What about the harm caused by these wars? The innocent lives destroyed? Why should we celebrate an institution responsible for so much suffering?" The room froze. Parents exchanged uneasy glances, students whispered nervously, and the solemn atmosphere cracked. Alex's pulse quickened, her words like a dagger to his chest. It felt personal, an attack not just on Sergeant Dan but on his father's memory. Dan's tone remained measured. "I respect your opinion," he said, "but today is about unity and recognizing sacrifices made for others." Claire scoffed. "Unity? That's easy to say when you ignore the cost paid by others for these so-called sacrifices." Alex's hands gripped his chair tightly. His heart pounded as anger and grief surged within him. For years he had stayed silent, avoiding conflict. But now, something had shifted. Claire's words struck at the values his father had lived and died for, and Alex felt a determination he couldn't ignore. As Claire's voice grew louder, Alex took a deep breath. He didn't yet know what he would say, but one thing was clear. He could no longer remain silent. The gym fell silent as Alex stood, his unexpected movement drawing every eye. He swallowed hard, his voice trembling but firm as he spoke. "With respect, this assembly isn't about politics. It's about honoring sacrifices, including those of my dad." His words rippled through the room, breaking the tension. Claire's sharp expression faltered before she recovered. "And what about the harm caused by these sacrifices?" she countered, her voice softer but still insistent. Alex stepped forward slightly, his fists clenched at his sides. "My dad died in combat," he said, his voice cracking. "He hated war, but he believed in serving something bigger than himself. Isn't that worth honoring?" The gym was utterly still. Students sat motionless, parents exchanged glances, and even teachers leaned forward. Sergeant Dan, standing silently behind the podium, stepped forward. His steady gaze met Alex's, and he nodded with quiet respect. "Your father's sacrifice," he said, his voice steady, "is exactly why we're here today. Thank you for having the courage to share that." Alex nodded, his throat tight, but Claire wasn't finished. "That doesn't erase the harm done. Celebrating one kind of sacrifice while ignoring the damage caused isn't justice." Before Alex could respond, Sergeant Dan spoke again, his tone calm but firm. "Ma'am, no one here is ignoring the complexities of the world, but today is about honoring those who served others, often at great personal cost." The air in the gym felt charged. Then, from near the front, another voice broke the silence. A girl, her voice trembling but resolute. "My brother is deployed right now," she said, her hands clasped tightly. "I don't know if he'll come home, but I'm proud of him. Can't we be proud of the people we love?" Claire's rigid posture softened. Her gaze darted around the room, taking in the tear-filled eyes and solemn faces of students, parents, and faculty. Slowly, she sat down, her lips pressed into a thin line. A collective exhale swept through the gym. Sergeant Dan returned to the podium. "Not everyone agrees with the military's mission, and that's okay," he said, his voice carrying across the room. "But the freedom to voice those opinions exists because of sacrifices like Alex's father's. Today, we honor that courage." The gym erupted into applause. Not thunderous, but steady and heartfelt. Alex sank back into his chair, his hands shaking slightly. For years he had carried the weight of his father's death in silence, but now he felt lighter. He had spoken not just for his father, but for himself. As the event ended, Alex felt a hand on his shoulder. He turned to see Sergeant Dan, who extended a hand. "You've got a brave heart, Alex," he said. "Your father would be proud." Tears welled in Alex's eyes, but he managed a small smile. "Thank you, sir," he said. As Alex left the gym, the weight on his chest lifted. For the first time in years, he felt a quiet peace, a connection to his father's legacy he hadn't fully understood until now. The school halls buzzed with conversation the next day. News of the assembly had spread quickly, and Alex's confrontation with Claire became the topic of every whispered discussion. As Alex walked to his locker, he noticed glances from students and hushed voices trailing behind him. The attention felt foreign, and he wished he could melt into the background. "Hey, Alex," a voice called. He turned to see Emma, the girl who had spoken up about her brother. She approached hesitantly, clutching her backpack. "I just wanted to say thank you. What you said yesterday, it meant a lot." Alex offered a small smile. "Thanks, but it wasn't anything special. I just couldn't stay quiet." Emma nodded. "Still, it took guts. My brother would have appreciated it." She paused. "Not everyone understands what it's like to have someone you love risk everything." Alex looked down, unsure how to respond. He hadn't intended to become the center of attention, and now he felt out of place. "Yeah," he said quietly. "It's complicated." Later, during lunch, Alex sat alone, picking at his food. His friend Ryan plopped down beside him, his tray clattering on the table. "Dude, you're like famous now," Ryan said, grinning. "Everyone's talking about you." Alex groaned. "Great, that's exactly what I wanted." "Come on, man," Ryan said, nudging him. "You stood up for something real. People respect that." Before Alex could respond, a shadow fell over the table. He looked up to see Claire standing there, arms crossed. The cafeteria seemed to quiet as students noticed her. Alex's stomach twisted. "Can we talk?" Claire asked, her tone unexpectedly calm. Ryan glanced at Alex, clearly uncomfortable. I'll catch you later," he mumbled, grabbing his tray and scurrying off. Alex hesitated before nodding. "Sure." Claire sat across from him, her sharp demeanor softened by something Alex couldn't quite place. Regret, perhaps. She sighed. "I wanted to apologize. For yesterday." Alex blinked. He hadn't expected an apology. "You don't have to." "I do," she interrupted. "I was out of line. I didn't think about how my words might affect you or others." Alex stared, unsure how to respond. Claire shifted uncomfortably. "I haven't changed my mind about everything," she continued, "but I can see that yesterday wasn't the time or place for what I said. I'm sorry for disrespecting your dad's memory." Alex sat silent for a moment. The anger he'd felt during the assembly had dulled, replaced by something new. Understanding, maybe. "Thanks," he said finally. "I appreciate that." Claire nodded, standing abruptly. She hesitated as if to say more, then turned and walked away. That evening, Alex sat on his bed, staring at the folded flag on his shelf. For the first time in years, the ache of loss felt less sharp. Instead, he felt pride, not just in his father, but in himself for speaking up. The next day would bring more whispers and stares. But for now, Alex allowed himself a rare moment of peace, knowing his words had made a difference, not just for him, but for others as well. In the days after the assembly, Alex noticed a shift. Teachers nodded in the halls and classmates offered quiet, good jobs. The attention felt strange and unwelcome, but he couldn't deny the impact of what he'd said. One day at lunch, Emma approached him again. "Alex, can I ask for your help?" she said, sitting across from him. "With what?" he asked. "I've been thinking about what you said at the assembly," Emma began. "My brother and others like him don't always get the recognition they deserve. What if we started a project to support veterans and families with deployed loved ones?" Alex hesitated. "I'm not really a project organizer," he said, pushing his food around his tray. Emma smiled. "People listen to you. That's leadership. You don't have to do it alone. Just think about it." Her words lingered in his mind as he went to history class. Mr. Halverson led a discussion about sacrifice and service. Some students shared stories of loved ones who served, while others echoed Claire's criticisms. Alex stayed quiet until Mr. Halverson turned to him. "Alex, you were in the middle of this discussion. What are your thoughts?" Alex shifted in his seat, all eyes on him. "I think we focus too much on politics," he said carefully. "It's not about agreeing with everything the military does. It's about honoring people who step up to protect others, no matter the cost." The room fell silent, his words resonating. A boy in the back raised his hand. "But shouldn't we also talk about the harm the military causes?" Alex nodded. "We can, but asking questions doesn't mean we ignore the sacrifices people make. It's not about glorifying war, it's about respecting those who give their all." Later, as Emma caught up to him in the hallway, she said, "You're good at this. You should really think about the project." That night, Alex sat at his desk, staring at his father's medals. His dad had believed in serving others, no matter the cost. Maybe it was time Alex carried that forward. By the end of the week, Alex approached her. "Okay," he said. "What's your idea?" Emma grinned. "We could start with a care package drive for deployed soldiers and letters for veterans at the VA." Alex nodded. "That could work, but we'll need help." Emma's confidence didn't waver. "We'll get help. People respect you, Alex. They'll want to join." Within days, the project came to life. Flyers went up, students volunteered, and supplies poured in. Snacks, toiletries, heartfelt letters. Even Claire contributed, quietly dropping off a box of supplies without saying a word. 2 weeks later, they sent out the first shipment. As Alex watched the boxes being loaded onto the truck, he felt a deep sense of fulfillment. This wasn't just about honoring his father anymore. It was about building something bigger. That evening, Emma called him. "We did something good today," she said. Alex smiled, leaning back against his bed. "Yeah, we did." For the first time, Alex felt a quiet pride, not just in his father but in the legacy he was helping to create. The project wasn't an end. It was a beginning. The care package drive sparked a ripple effect Alex hadn't anticipated. Letters began arriving from deployed soldiers, thanking the students for their kindness. Some wrote about how the snacks and letters reminded them of home, while others expressed gratitude for being remembered. These letters were read aloud during morning announcements, bringing smiles, and even a few tears. One day, Emma handed Alex a letter. "This is from Private Carter. He says he hasn't gotten a letter in months until now." Alex read the note, the words stirring something deep inside him. "We're making a difference," he murmured. Emma nodded. "That's why I think we should keep this going. What if we expanded it? Visits to the VA hospital? Maybe a mentorship program for kids with parents who are deployed?" Alex hesitated. The care package drive had been manageable, but this sounded overwhelming. "That's a lot," he admitted. Emma smiled. "We'll take it one step at a time. You don't have to do it alone." Before long, they were organizing a Veteran Appreciation Day at the school. The plan was to invite local veterans to share their stories, giving students a chance to learn directly from them. As word spread, support poured in. The art club made decorations, the student council handled logistics, and Principal Reynolds reached out to veterans in the community. The day of the event came quickly. As Alex stood in the gym, watching students set up chairs and hang banners, he felt a mix of pride and nerves. "What if no one shows up?" he asked Emma. "They'll show up," she assured him with a grin. She was right. By the time the event began, the gym was packed. Veterans sat in a reserved section at the front, including Sergeant Dan, who nodded at Alex from his seat. The program started with a speech from Principal Reynolds and a performance by the school choir. Then the veterans took the stage, sharing stories, some funny, others deeply moving. The students listened intently, their usual restlessness replaced by respect. When it was Alex's turn to speak, his hands trembled as he stepped to the podium. He scanned the crowd, took a deep breath, and began. "I never thought I'd be standing here," he said, "but after losing my dad, I've learned how important it is to honor those who serve, not just for what they've done, but for what they represent." He spoke about his father, the values of service and sacrifice, and the need to remember the people behind the uniforms. By the time he finished, the gym erupted into applause. Alex stepped away from the podium, his heart pounding but full. After the event, students lingered to thank the veterans. Sergeant Dan approached Alex, his expression warm. "You've done something remarkable here," he said. "Your dad would be proud." Alex's throat tightened, but he smiled. "Thank you, sir." As the gym emptied, Emma joined Alex, a satisfied grin on her face. "See? I told you this would be worth it." Alex chuckled. "Yeah, you were right." For the first time, Alex felt he was truly honoring his father, not just with words, but with actions. And he knew this was only the beginning of something much bigger. The Veteran Appreciation Day event marked a turning point, not just for Alex, but for the entire school. Students began to see veterans as more than uniforms, understanding their stories and sacrifices. The care package drive continued, but Emma's push for VA hospital visits became a reality. Alex hesitated at first, unsure if he was ready to face memories of his father, but Emma's determination won him over. Their first visit to the VA was humbling. Alex and a small group of students brought letters and small gifts, and the veterans' gratitude was overwhelming. One elderly man, Mr. Carter, pulled Alex aside. "You remind me of my son," he said quietly. "He served, too. Didn't make it home." Alex's throat tightened. I know how that feels. My dad didn't come home either." Mr. Carter nodded, his eyes kind. "You're honoring him by doing this. It matters." The words stayed with Alex, turning his grief into something purposeful. Each interaction at the VA brought new meaning to his father's legacy. It wasn't just about remembrance anymore. It was about carrying forward his values. As their efforts grew, so did the challenges. Coordinating events, managing donations, and keeping students engaged was exhausting. Alex often felt overwhelmed, but Emma and others stepped in to share the load. Principal Reynolds even suggested making their initiative an official school club. "What if we can't keep this going?" Alex asked Emma as they worked on flyers. Emma laughed. "Alex, you've already kept it going. A club just makes it official." Within weeks, the school approved their club, Voices for Valor, a name Emma had suggested. The mission was simple: to honor veterans and educate students on service and sacrifice. Their first meeting was packed, with dozens of students eager to get involved. As Alex stood at the front of the room explaining their goals, he felt a mixture of nerves and pride. For the first time, he didn't mind being the center of attention. The club's activities multiplied. They organized more care package drives, planned additional VA visits, and launched a mentorship program for students with military families. Each project brought new energy and purpose to Alex and his peers. One evening, after a long meeting, Alex walked home and found himself thinking about his dad. For so long, his absence had been a void. Now, that void felt smaller. Alex wasn't just grieving anymore. He was honoring his father in meaningful ways. At home, Alex sat at his desk and pulled out an old photo of his dad in uniform. "I hope I'm making you proud," he whispered. The next day, Alex found a note in his locker. It was unsigned, but he recognized Claire's handwriting. "You've shown me a perspective I hadn't considered before. Thank you." Alex folded the note, a small smile tugging at his lips. Change, he realized, didn't always happen loudly. Sometimes it was quiet, a ripple that grew with time. And as Alex slipped the note into his pocket, he knew this was just the beginning. Voices for Valor was growing, but so were the challenges. Balancing the club, school, and his emotions often left Alex overwhelmed. One afternoon, Emma found him sitting outside the school, his head in his hands. "You okay?" she asked, sitting beside him. Alex sighed. "I don't know if I can keep all this going. The club, school, my dad. It's a lot." Emma placed a hand on his shoulder. "You're not alone, Alex. You've got us. It's okay to step back when you need to." Her words lingered, but the weight of responsibility kept Alex moving forward. That week, the club faced its biggest hurdle yet. A local sponsor pulled out, leaving them short on funding for their care package drive. The news hit hard, and disappointment filled their next meeting. "We'll find another way," Emma said firmly. But Alex wasn't so sure. After the meeting, he stayed behind, staring at the dwindling supplies. "You look like you've got the world on your shoulders," said a familiar voice. Alex turned to see Sergeant Dan in the doorway. "Something like that," Alex admitted. Dan walked over, his expression thoughtful. "When I was in the Marines, we faced obstacles all the time. You know what got us through?" Alex shook his head. "Adapt and overcome," Dan said. "You figure out what you can do with what you've got, and you don't do it alone." The advice stuck. The next day, Alex proposed a solution: a community barbecue to raise funds. The club jumped into action, spreading the word and gathering support. By the day of the event, the school courtyard buzzed with energy. Local businesses pitched in, parents volunteered, and students manned tables and grills. As Alex worked the grill, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. The setbacks had been frustrating, but seeing the community come together reminded him why this work mattered. The barbecue was a success. They raised more than enough money to fund the care packages, and the event brought the school and community closer together. As the night wound down, Emma approached Alex with a grin. "See, I told you we'd figure it out." Alex chuckled. "Yeah, you were right." As they cleaned up, Alex noticed Claire watching from the edge of the courtyard. She caught his eye, nodded, and walked away. The gesture was quiet but meaningful. The next day, Alex brought the funds to the club meeting, where excitement filled the room as they planned their next steps. Voices for Valor was no longer just a school project. It was a movement. That evening, Alex sat on his bed, flipping through old photos of his dad. For the first time, he didn't feel the ache of loss as sharply. Instead, he felt connected, a bond that transcended time. "This is for you, Dad," he whispered. And as Alex drifted to sleep, he dreamed not of loss but of the future, of lives he could touch, stories he could preserve, and ways to carry his father's legacy forward. As Voices for Valor grew, so did its impact. The club had become a cornerstone of the school, inspiring students to find purpose in service. But for Alex, success came with a realization. While he was honoring his father's legacy, parts of his grief remained unresolved. One Friday evening, as he and Emma packed care packages in the gym, Emma noticed his quiet mood. "You've been quiet," she said. "What's on your mind?" Alex hesitated. "I've been thinking about my dad. All this, the club, the events, it helps, but sometimes it feels like I'm still carrying something heavy." Emma nodded. "Have you ever talked to someone about it?" Alex shook his head. "I wouldn't know where to start." "You don't have to do it alone," she said gently. "Sometimes just starting is enough." Her words stayed with him. That Sunday, Alex visited the local VA hospital. This time it wasn't for a club project. It was personal. He asked to speak to someone about his father and was introduced to Mr. Bradley, a retired Army chaplain. In a quiet corner of the lounge, Alex opened up for the first time. He spoke of the pride and pain, the memories and questions that lingered. Mr. Bradley listened intently. When Alex finished, the chaplain said, "Grief doesn't weaken when shared. It makes you stronger. Your father's legacy isn't just in what he did, it's in how you carry it forward." The conversation was a turning point. Alex left the hospital feeling lighter, as though part of his burden had been lifted. For the first time, he felt that honoring his father didn't have to mean carrying the weight of grief alone. The following week, during a club meeting, Alex shared what he had learned. "Honoring someone's memory isn't just about what you do for them," he said. "It's about taking care of yourself so you can keep going. That's how you make their legacy last." His words resonated. After the meeting, several students approached him to share their own stories of loss and resilience. It reminded Alex that while grief was deeply personal, it could also connect people in profound ways. That weekend, the club hosted its first emotional wellness workshop, partnering with the VA to provide resources for students and families. The event drew participants not just from the school, but from the broader community. Sessions on coping with grief, support networks, and storytelling filled the gym with a sense of healing and unity. As Alex watched families interact with counselors and volunteers, he felt a deep sense of purpose. For so long, he had focused on his father's absence. Now, he realized, his father's legacy was alive in the lives he was touching and the stories he was helping to preserve. At the end of the night, as the last few attendees trickled out, Emma joined him by the door. "This was a good idea," she said, her voice filled with pride. Alex smiled. "Yeah, it was. Thanks for pushing me." Emma grinned. "That's what I'm here for." As they turned off the lights and locked up, Alex felt a quiet peace. The journey wasn't over, but for the first time, he felt like he was exactly where he was meant to be. The weight of his grief had shifted. Not gone, but transformed into something that propelled him forward. As Voices for Valor approached its first anniversary, the club's impact had grown beyond what Alex or Emma imagined. What began as a care package drive had become a movement that united the school and community. For Alex, it was a way to honor his father's legacy and give his grief a sense of purpose. The anniversary celebration in the school gym was their most ambitious event yet, with guest speakers, families of service members, and a tribute to fallen soldiers. Alex found himself juggling logistics, speeches, and a flood of emotions. "What if it's not good enough?" he asked Emma during a late-night meeting. Emma glanced up from her notes, her tone steady. "It's not about being perfect, Alex. It's about reminding people why this matters." Her words calmed him, but self-doubt lingered. The night before the event, Alex sat at his desk, staring at his father's photograph. "I hope this is enough," he whispered. The next day, the gym was transformed with flags, banners, and displays of the club's achievements. Tables showcased letters, photos, and stories of service. As the room filled with students, parents, and community members, Alex stood backstage, his heart pounding. The program began with a welcome from Principal Reynolds and a slideshow capturing the club's journey. Emma spoke next, her voice confident as she explained the mission of Voices for Valor and the importance of unity. Then it was Alex's turn. He stepped to the podium, the room falling silent. Taking a deep breath, he began. "A year ago, I was just trying to make sense of losing my dad. What I've learned is that grief doesn't have to hold you back. It can propel you forward." Alex spoke about resilience, service, and the lessons he'd learned from his father's memory and the club's work. As he scanned the crowd, he saw familiar faces. Emma, Sergeant Dan, Mr. Bradley, and even Claire, nodding in encouragement. When he finished, the audience erupted into applause. The memorial tribute followed, featuring a moving video montage and a moment of silence. Tears filled the room as attendees reflected on the sacrifices of service members. For Alex, it was emotional, but it also felt like the culmination of everything he had worked toward. After the event, a man in uniform approached Alex. "You must be Alex," he said, extending a hand. "I served with your dad. He was one of the best men I ever knew." Alex's breath caught. "You knew my dad?" The man nodded. "He talked about you all the time. He was proud of you then, and I know he'd be even prouder now." Tears welled in Alex's eyes. "Thank you. That means everything to me." As the gym emptied, Alex stood with Emma by the stage, taking in the now quiet room. "We did it," he said softly. Emma smiled. "No, Alex, you did it. This is your legacy, too." That night, as Alex walked home under a sky filled with stars, he felt an overwhelming sense of peace. His father's memory was no longer a weight. It was a light guiding him forward. The journey wasn't over, but for the first time, Alex felt like he was exactly where he was meant to be. The weeks after the anniversary celebration brought a mix of accomplishment and reflection for Alex. Voices for Valor had grown into something far greater than he ever imagined, yet Alex felt a quiet longing for what came next. One afternoon, Emma caught up with him in the hallway. "You've been quiet lately," she said. "What's on your mind?" Alex shrugged. "It feels like we've done so much, but now, what's next? How do we keep this going without losing what made it special?" Emma smiled knowingly. "You don't need all the answers right now, Alex. Sometimes things grow on their own." That evening, Alex sat at his desk, flipping through old photos and letters from his dad. Each one felt like a bridge to the man who had shaped him. He realized that his journey wasn't just about honoring his father, it was about becoming someone his father would be proud of. At the next club meeting, Alex stood before the group. "We've come so far," he began, "but I think it's time to share this. What if we help other schools start their own Voices for Valor chapters?" The room buzzed with excitement. By the end of the meeting, they had a plan to reach out to schools in the district, offering resources and guidance to help them build similar programs. Over the following weeks, the club hosted workshops, spoke at assemblies, and built a website to share their mission. Slowly, new chapters began to form, each carrying the spirit of Voices for Valor. One day, Alex received an email from a teacher at a neighboring school. "Thank you for sharing your journey," it read. "Our students now have a way to honor their loved ones who have served." Reading the words, Alex felt pride swell in his chest. The movement was growing, creating connections that transcended his own grief. His father's legacy was no longer just his to carry. It belonged to everyone who had joined the mission. At the end of the school year, the club held its final meeting to reflect on their progress and celebrate their success. As Alex looked around the room, he saw faces filled with pride and determination. These weren't just classmates, they were a family, united by a shared purpose. Before the meeting ended, Emma stood up, holding a framed photo of the club taken at the anniversary event. She handed it to Alex, smiling. At the bottom, a plaque read, "To Alex, for turning grief into hope and for leading with courage." Blinking back tears, Alex accepted the gift. "Thank you," he said softly. "But this is about all of us." That night, Alex walked home under a sky filled with stars. The light above reminded him of the journey he had taken and the future that lay ahead. "I hope you see this, Dad," Alex whispered. "I hope you know we're making a difference." As he stood there, he felt not just peace, but fulfillment. His father's memory wasn't just part of his past, it was the foundation of a life that would continue to inspire others. And as Alex turned toward home, he felt ready to embrace whatever came next, knowing he wasn't walking this path alone.